read 82 books this year, and here are my favorites. Hi, I'm Alex, this is Books and Paperbacks, and it is finally time for me to stop procrastinating and tell you my favorite books of the year. I'm doing things a little bit differently this year because I had a pretty good reading month, and I personally hate putting a list together in numerical order of the books that I enjoyed. So I brainstormed a different idea, which is I am going to go through every month and tell you my favorite books. I really like this style because it doesn't make me put a number to the books that I enjoyed. I believe Kathy did this last year, so I will link her down below. All of the titles will be down below, as well as videos you can find them in. I have done so much content this year, and I'm excited to finally share with you the books I enjoyed. So without further ado, here are my favorite books of 2024. Starting with January, I actually had a lot in this month, which is great. My first book of the year was Joy to the World by Kai Shepley and Lisa Bunker, and I really enjoyed this. I read it for a vlog where I had song lyrics pick my TBR. I read books with song lyrics in the titles, and I chose Joy to the World, and I really enjoyed it. We're following a trans girl who is outed in her town. It talks about activism, and I really enjoyed it. Another book for that vlog is Friday I'm in Love by Cameron Garrett. I love her. She's one of my favorite authors, and I loved this book. It is about a girl named Mikalia who is not your typical teen. She likes old music, including Fleetwood Mac. She lives with her mother. She has a complicated situation with her dad. What I love about this YA is that Mikalia works a job. She works at a grocery store, and the whole book talks about complicated familial dynamics, as well as being in a different financial bracket or class than your friends. At the beginning of the book, she's attending her friend's extravagant Sweet 16, and she decides that she wants to have a coming out party to come out as bisexual, and she has all of these ideas. Also, what I really like about this book is the chapter headers tell you how much money she has saved or has left. It says her checking account balance, and then it says what she might have used. So specifically this says checking account balance $225 minus $25 for gas and candy. I love Cameron Garrett, and I loved this book. A book that I have been raving about all year is a graphic novel, and I can't believe I read it in January. I was so certain that I read it for February, but this is Confetti Rums by Nadia Shammas. Now, when I first read this, it was a weird book, and I didn't think that it would be a favorite of mine until the year progressed and I just kept talking about how much I loved it. This is about queer teens on Halloween. They're at a cemetery trying to summon spirits, and they see this building. I can't remember what the specific building is called. I know that there's a specific name for it, but they enter this building and they are met with an animatronic, and then it is a portal fantasy. They go through a portal and there are talking animals, and basically they have to collect teeth in order to complete a quest. It was so weird, but it was so fun and cool. This is definitely very much out of my comfort zone, and I'm still surprised that I liked it, but I thought it was so fun. You know, sometimes you just read a weird book and you're like, that was awesome. And that is exactly what Confetti Realms was for me. And last in January was a poetry collection, Pocahontas by Tay Tibble. This was such a beautifully written book. It talks about being a Pacific Islander and indigeneity. She also talks about pop culture, but the theme of the poetry collection is challenging different mythologies. Next for February is the last book in that song lyrics vlog, and I'm surprised that every single book I mentioned became a favorite. That's so fun. As You Walk On by Julian Winters, I couldn't not mention. I loved this book. It is a YA retelling or reimagining of The Breakfast Club. It is so queer, and I just loved how messy it was. I love complicated characters, but I also just love the way that Julian Winters creates and writes. All of his books are so unique. Whenever I pick up a Julian Winters book, I am always surprised and come away with a new favorite. I just love the way that he tells stories in such a creative way. In this book, there's talk about academic pressure, as our main character Theo feels a lot of pressure of going to college and being the first in his family to go to college. He also has a dad who is gay, and he talks about him having a surrogate and being a single parent. I thought that was a really interesting dynamic to add as well because it's new. It's not something I ever see, and that's what I mean. Julian Winters, his books are so unique, but I loved this so much. It is definitely a new all-time favorite for me. Next, I have to mention this vlog because I had tested the Storygraphs recommendations feature, and it did me a solid because I got a bunch of new favorite books, including With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. It's no surprise that she's on here. I love her books. We're following Amani, who is a Afro-Latina teen mom. She's going to high school and she wants to go to culinary school and pursue being a chef. She loves food. But in reality, she's a teen mom, and I just loved this perspective. I think it's so important to have, and it was set in Philadelphia, and I was so happy to finally read a book set in Philly from a voice that has lived there first. I'm from Philadelphia, and I feel like when I read books that are set in Philly, aside from Such a Fun Age, I don't see many perspectives from Black folks that live there. So I was so happy to have a perspective from a teen mom who is a Black person, and I was just so happy to see that representation in this book. But overall, it was just so good. I loved reading Amani's voice, especially because there are so many instances where she just feels unheard and unseen. There are so many times where adults in her life fail her, especially teachers at school, because there is a teacher in the book who is telling her to pursue something or giving her some advice that was just out of touch, because she's like, this woman doesn't have children and she does not understand my situation and probably never will. So I have to put my daughter's needs before myself. There's also a lot of just messiness with her partner and his family. And again, I just thought that this was excellent and I highly recommend it. The next two favorites are from that same vlog, so I'll just mention them here. I've talked about Real Queer America all year, so I feel like I don't really need an explanation, but this is a nonfiction about a reporter who is a trans woman, and she goes to red states to interview folks living there who are queer. This book emphasizes why queer folks in red states don't want to leave. My cat is so mad that I'm doing this right now because he just wants to sit on my bed. Do you want to continue for me? You want to tell us? Not me having to move angles so that the cat can sit on the bed. Let's talk about Ace of Spades because I have been raving about this book all year for a good reason. I loved this thriller. This is a YA academic thriller. The audiobook was fantastic. This was so thrilling and gripping, but also really heartbreaking at times because of the reality of Black kids in school being failed by their administrators and adults. This is such a fantastic academic thriller, and I'm so glad I finally got around to it this year. Hi, editing me here. You're probably going to see me throughout this video because, of course, I forgot books. And I don't know how I forgot to mention The Chromatic Fantasy by H.A. I have a video about this as well. It was my Trans Rights Readathon vlog, and I loved this so much. It is a T for T romance with royalty, and it's very sexy and steamy. It's a graphic novel. I loved it so much, and I don't know how I forgot to even add it. For April, I have one book, Dear Mothman by Robin Gow. This is a middle grade written in verse about two trans boys who are in the closet. We're following Noah, whose best friend just passed away, and they were both trans boys. Y'all, when I say this book broke me, oh my god. This was so heartbreaking because of grief and just learning that these two boys couldn't be themselves. Noah is also autistic, and learning from him about his best friend Lewis literally killed me. It was so heartbreaking. Just the fact that Lewis died before he could fully come out as a trans boy, and just their friendship and some relationship. It was just a sad situation. It was just such a sad situation, but I loved the way that Mothman was incorporated. Noah wants to prove for his science project that Mothman is real. That's something Lewis was really passionate about. And the way that Robin Gow wrote this was just so fantastic. It's written in verse, if I haven't said that already, and it was just fantastic. I'm so glad I finally read it and that I finally got to read Robin Gal this year. Moving on to May, I have 2 books. The Z Word by Lindsay King Miller. I was so happy to finally read a queer zombie book, and this one definitely delivered. And last for April is Winnie Nash Is Not Your Sunshine by Nicole Melleby. Now that I think about it, I have read very emotional books this year, and this is no different. However, it does have queer joy. We're following Winnie, who has to live with her grandmother for the summer at the Jersey Shore, and she is not happy. She hasn't heard great things about her grandma, according to her mother, and her mother is pregnant and they don't want any complications to happen, so that's why she's living there for the summer. She meets these girls, and she also attends a book club run at this senior center. Oh my god, it was hilarious, but also really sweet at the same time. I just love Nicole Melleby. The way she writes queer middle grade is fantastic, and I just really felt for Winnie in this book. Moving on to June, if you followed me this year, you know I read a shit ton of books in June. So I have a whole list. I could probably do my best books just in June. The first one has to go to Lucky Red by Claudia Cravens. This is a queer western. The audiobook was fantastic, honestly. I loved this for the audiobook alone. We're following a 16-year-old girl, Bridget, whose father passes away and she is left to fend for herself, and she ends up finding a brothel filled with queer women who take her in. This was so fantastic. Everything I ever wanted in a book. Speaking of emotional books, You Don't Have a Shot by Raquel Marie. This talks about grief. It is a YA Rivals to Lovers featuring 2 girls who play soccer, and it has a lot of messy queers and a lot of big emotions. For nonfiction, I read and love We Have Always Been Here by Samra Habib. I read this pretty quickly and I really enjoyed it. This explores queerness as a Pakistani refugee and Muslim. Samra and their family fled to Canada from Pakistan, and this chronicles their life. There's talk about arranged marriages, gender roles, and really finding your sexuality after you realize that your views and values don't align with what you were told as a kid. I love this so much, and if you're gonna pick up any nonfiction this year, I recommend this one. And Real Queer America, obviously. Next is Chlorine by Jade Song. Since I've read this, I've been singing its praises. The audiobook was fantastic. We're following a young girl who is on the high school swim team. It talks a lot about how toxic that culture can be, and she's sapphic. We have so many different things going on here, including mental health, because our main character thinks that she is a mermaid. We get to read, or in my case, since I listened to the audiobook, hear her inner thoughts. This was such a wild book, but it was so fantastic. Honestly, it was such a beautifully written book, even though it was outlandish at some points, just meaning that there were some jaw-dropping times where you're like, oh my god. Aside from that, there's a sapphic romance, and I really loved the way that was written and incorporated. Another book I've been raving about is Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. I loved this duology. It is a cozy sci-fi, it has speculative fiction, and it was everything I have been craving. I really enjoyed this, and it started my journey to reading more sci-fi. Another book is Playing for Keeps by Jennifer Dugan. This is a YA Rivals to Lovers as well, or like an enemies to lovers between 2 girls. One is a pitcher and the other is an umpire. I really loved the way that these characters talked about family dynamics. Both of them have complicated parental experiences. They also have grief. Again, a very messy book with messy queers. I ate it up, I loved it, and I'm so glad to have finally read Jennifer Dugan. I can't wait to read more for this year. A Scatter of Light by Melinda Lowe became a new favorite of mine, and I don't even know why. It was really just the timing of this book that was perfect. This is set in 2016, following a teen girl who has to live with her grandmother for the summer. This is a companion to Last Night at the Telegraph Club. We get to see a little bit into the events after Last Night at the Telegraph Club, but it's more of like family dynamics. This is all about art, and so our main character ends up going to live with her grandmother for the summer. Something happens that derails her summer plans, and she is forced to go to San Francisco to live with her grandmother. And I just love these kind of books. I love like elder stories and stories about art. And from the list you can see that I like books where the character has to go somewhere for the summer and something happens that changes their life in some way. I was bound to love this, but I didn't think I was going to love it as much as I did. It became a new favorite. It was so good. Next is another poetry collection. This is Grief Slut by Evelyn Berry. This is written by a trans woman and it talks about masculinity, transness, obviously from the title, grief, and one of my favorite poems was about childhood friendship. And last is the Luis Ortega Survival Club by Sonora Reyes, another author that I discovered this year. This is so queer and neurodivergent. Our main character is autistic with selective mutism, and this is a revenge story. When she is essayed by Luis Ortega, it is the whole trajectory of her finally realizing that something happened to her, and she ends up meeting a group of people who are in the same boat and they have been wronged by Luis Ortega. So it is John Tucker Must Die, but queer and neurodivergent and POC. I really enjoyed this so much and I'm so glad I finally read it. I literally still think about this book. Hi, back again. I read so many books in June that I forgot to mention Dawn Raid. I loved this. It is a middle grade set in New Zealand and it talks about the Polynesian panthers. This was recommended by Michelle at Throw Once Another Letter for my 12 and 12 and this is a hidden gem. I really enjoyed it. And last for June is the graphic novel North Ranger by Ray Tiquiero. This is a great book if you like horror movies. I just love the way this was illustrated and written. This is a Northanger Abbey retelling following a gay boy living in Texas. Him and his father go to a job for the summer and it's this lavish family and he ends up infatuated with one of the boys there. It talks about not being safe in the South and it is horror movie-esque. It was so thrilling. So fantastic. I loved it. That's everything for June. Moving on to July, I have one book. This is The Darkness Outside Us by Elliot Schreifer. I have been raving about this book as well since I read it. I loved it. It's a sci-fi thriller and it kept me on the edge of my seat. Moving on to August, the graphic novel Flamer I read for my band Books video. This was such a hidden gem, very underrated, and I am still so sad for the kids that are not going to be able to get to read this. It's such an important book. We're following a Filipino boy who goes to summer camp. He's gay. He has so many complicated feelings, especially surrounding religion, and he has a lot of mental health going on, specifically unaliving himself and suicidal thoughts. This talks about self-harm, and I just said this is a book that my inner child needed and I would have really benefited from as a teen. And last for August, one of my new favorite authors in queer horror is Chuck Tingle, and I loved Bury Your Gaze. This was such a great queer horror and audiobook. Definitely one of my favorite audiobooks of the year. I don't have anything for September, so I'm gonna move on to October where I have a couple things. The Cozy Mystery It's Elementary by Elise Bryant was so fantastic. I ate this book up. I just love the way it was written. I didn't have any notes. It was so good and I really enjoyed the way it talked about social issues like gifted programs, banned books, and how evil adults can be. Next is the novella Splinter by Jesper Hyde. This is a Sleepy Hollow retelling. It was right up my alley with gore, queerness, and it had a cast of Black, Asian, and BIPOC characters. A graphic novel I loved was Brooms by Jasmine Walls. This is following a cast of characters. We have a queer relationship. We have Black, Asian, and Indigenous characters. There is mention of Choctaw Sign Language, so we have disability rep. I thought this was so fantastic. Set in 1930s Mississippi, this is about illegal witch racing. Oh my god, I was obsessed with this book. It is so good. I need more books like this. It was so incredible. That's everything for October. Next, for November, I have Sisters of the Lost Nation by Nick Medina. This was so incredible. Another great audiobook. This is an Indigenous thriller about missing and murdered Indigenous women women following a girl, Anna, whose sister Grace goes missing, as well as other girls in her town, and she wants to figure out where they're all going and try to find her sister. It also has flashbacks, which I enjoyed, as we get to learn more about Grace and some of the things she was doing up until her missing. And oh, this was so good. I can't wait to read more of Nick Medina. And last for December, Here We Go Again by Alison Cochrane is probably my best book of the year, besides Lucky Red and a couple others. But if you asked me my best book of the year, it would probably be this one. I already told you the spiel in my last couple of videos, and I literally have a vlog of me documenting myself reading this and sobbing like a big old baby. This is all about grief. It's a second chance romance, and Alison Cochrane can do no wrong in my mind when it comes to her writing and storytelling. This was so fantastic. Oh my god, I loved this so much. I'm so glad I finally read it and that I got to read it for the end of the year, because if I didn't, it probably wouldn't even be in this list, because I probably would read it next year. But I didn't, because I already read it and it was fantastic. Speaking of vlogs, I had Spotify Wrap pick my TBR, and that video delivered as well, because I read Your Driver Is Waiting by Priya Guns, and this is my new favorite underrated book. It is about a rideshare driver. It talks about classism, white feminism, and performative activism. My last nonfiction on this list is Pretty by K.B. Brookins. This is written in prose and verse, talking about masculinity from the perspective of a black non-binary trans masc person. This is very heavy. It talks about growing up as an adoptee, religious bigotry, SA, homophobia, etc. And I thought it was fantastic and criminally underrated. Next is a hidden gem that I found on a whim and is criminally underrated. Literally, it has about 300 ratings on Goodreads. This is Rana June and the One and Only Now by Shadi Etat. We're following Rana June, an Iranian-American teenage girl who is a lesbian. She's in the closet and feels like she can't meet the expectations of her strict parents. She has some unresolved issues with her father, as he lives primarily in Iran and is very absent in her life. Her mother wants her to be ladylike and more girly, but Rana June just wants to wear black clothes, and she doesn't care for anything that her mother is putting on her, societal and cultural expectations wise. When her best friend Louis passes away unexpectedly, she is met with grief and she doesn't know what to do about it. She's so confused by his death and doesn't even know how to properly start to grieve. Once time passes, she realizes the best way to honor him is to enter a rap battle competition that he would have entered. But the only problem is she is afraid of public speaking. She enlists the help of her basketball coach, who helps her gain confidence to enter the rap battle. She loves to write poetry, and there is some complicated situations going on. It's a YA with some angst and drama, but I thought this was fantastic, and like I said, criminally underrated. And the final book in my best books of the year is the graphic novel The Tea Dragon Festival by Kay O'Neill. I loved this so much. I wish tea dragons were real. I liked this storyline of this. I just love this series. It is so cozy and definitely a great book to end the year on. And those are my favorite books of 2024. Do we have any in common? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to be featured in a video, I want to react to your favorite books. So let me know any of your favorite books of the year down below, and you might be featured in that video come February. If you don't feel like leaving a lengthy comment, you can just leave a book emoji so I know that you stayed. Thank you to my top patrons for their support, and if you want to support me further, my Patreon link is down below. If you want to hear about more of the books I enjoy this year, as well as my reading stats, that video will be here, and you can subscribe there. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a wonderful new year filled with good books, and I hope to see you in my next video very soon.